Every night while you sleep, your immune system is running the most sophisticated defense operation in the known universe. More complex than any hospital, any laboratory, any system I encountered in over 15 years of internal medicine.
They came from your dinner plate, not from a bottle, not from a pharmacy, from food. I want you to sit with a number for a second. After age 60, the thymus, the small gland behind your breastbone that trains your immune cells to recognize threats, has shrunk to a fraction of the size it was in your 20s. Researchers call this immunosenescence, the gradual aging of the immune system itself. It's real, it's documented, and it's one of the reasons a cold hits harder at 70 than it did at 30, and why vaccines sometimes need higher doses or extra boosters as we age. But here is what almost nobody explains clearly. A shrinking thymus does not mean a defenseless body. It means a body that needs better raw materials delivered more consistently to keep the immune cells it still has sharp, well-fed, and correctly instructed. And that is entirely something you influence, meal by meal. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the last food on this list, I'm going to show you the one that changed how I think about immunity and aging altogether. A food most people either ignore completely or eat in a way that destroys the very thing that makes it valuable. It comes with a catch almost nobody mentions, and once you hear it, you won't look at your own kitchen the same way. My name is Dr. Park. I've spent more than 15 years practicing internal medicine, with a research focus in nutritional biochemistry, the study of how what we eat, how we cook it, and how we store it changes the body at the molecular level. I'm not here to sell you a supplement or scare you into a course. I'm here to walk you through the actual research, the kind published in immunology journals, not headlines, and tell you plainly what it means for your body at your age starting tonight. Let me give you the 60-second version of how your immune system actually works, because everything else in this video will make more sense once you have this picture. Think of your immune system as having two branches. The first is called innate immunity. It's the fast response team, cells like neutrophils and natural killer cells that attack anything unfamiliar within minutes to hours. No training required. The second is adaptive immunity, the slower, smarter branch, built around T cells and B cells that learn to recognize specific threats, like a particular virus, and remember them for years, sometimes decades. Vaccines work because of this branch. The thymus I mentioned a moment ago is where T cells get their training. And here's the part that matters for tonight's list. Both branches depend on a steady supply of specific micronutrients, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, certain proteins, certain plant compounds, to build new immune cells, repair damaged ones, and send the right chemical signals between them. Starve that supply chain, even mildly, even without obvious symptoms, and the whole operation slows down. Researchers at institutions like the National Institute on Aging have spent decades documenting exactly this pattern in older adults. Not a collapse, but a slow-motion under-resourcing. Here is the one idea I want you to carry through every single item on this list tonight. Most immune advice you've heard is about avoidance. Avoid sugar, avoid this virus, avoid crowds in flu season. Almost nobody talks about what you should be actively adding on a rotating basis to keep the raw materials flowing. That's the lens for tonight. Not fear, supply. And I'll say this once clearly, because I take it seriously. Nothing on this list replaces your flu shot, your pneumonia vaccine, your shingles vaccine, or any medication your physician has you on. Food supports the system. It does not substitute for the tools modern medicine has built to protect that same system. Keep both ideas in your head at once. That's actually the more sophisticated, more Korean way of thinking about health, if I'm honest with you. In Korean medical tradition, there's a concept called yaksik dongwon. Food and medicine share the same root. It doesn't mean food replaces medicine. It means they come from the same intention, keeping the body in balance before disease ever gets a foothold. Prevention over cure. That's the frame. Let's begin the list. Number 8 is oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, the fatty, cold water kind, not the lean white fish people often reach for out of habit. Here's why this earns a spot on an immune list rather than just a heart health list, which is where most people file it. Oily fish is one of the richest natural sources of vitamin D and long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA. Vitamin D isn't just a bone nutrient, it directly regulates how immune cells communicate. And a genuine deficiency, which is extremely common in adults over 60 due to thinner skin and less sun exposure, has been associated in population studies with a higher rate of respiratory infections. I want to be precise here. This is an association documented in observational research, not proof that low vitamin D alone causes infection, but it's consistent enough across studies that public health bodies, including the NIH's Office of Dietary Supplements, treat correcting a deficiency as a reasonable low-risk priority for older adults. The omega-3s, meanwhile, help resolve inflammation once an immune response has done its job. They help the system stand down properly instead of staying activated longer than it needs to, which is its own quiet drain on your reserves. A 3.5-ounce serving of salmon gives you somewhere around 400 to 600 international units of vitamin D, depending on the fish and how it was raised, plus roughly a gram or more of combined EPA and DHA. So what should you do? Aim for oily fish 2 to 3 times a week, and if you truly dislike fish, ask your physician about testing your vitamin D level directly, a simple blood test, rather than guessing. Number 7, and this is where I need you to lean in, because it surprises almost everyone. Fermented cabbage, sauerkraut in the West, kimchi in Korea. I'm not putting this here because it's Korean. I want to be completely honest with you about that. I'm putting it here because of what actually happens during fermentation, a process that has nothing to do with geography and everything to do with microbiology. Roughly 70% of your immune tissue lives in and around your gut, in what's called gut-associated lymphoid tissue. The bacteria living in your intestines constantly talk to that immune tissue, and a more diverse gut microbiome has been linked in research to a more balanced, better regulated immune response. Fermented vegetables introduce live lactic acid bacteria, strains like lactobacillus, directly into that ecosystem. A study environment and population data from Korea's own long-running research into traditional diets has associated regular fermented vegetable consumption with markers of a more diverse, more resilient gut flora. I'll be honest with you about the other side of this, because accuracy matters more to me than a clean story. Kimchi and sauerkraut are also both high in sodium, sometimes exceeding 300 to 500 milligrams per half-cup serving. If you have high blood pressure or kidney disease, that sodium is not a small detail. It matters as much as the bacteria do. So what should you do? A small daily serving, a quarter to a half cup, of naturally fermented, unpasteurized cabbage, checking the label for live cultures. And if your blood pressure runs high, treat it as a garnish, not a side dish, and mention it to your doctor if you're tracking sodium closely. Number 6 is garlic, and specifically the way you prepare it, because this is where most people accidentally throw away the one compound that matters most. Garlic contains a compound called allicin. But here's the detail almost nobody tells you. Allicin doesn't exist in whole, uncrushed garlic. It's formed only when you crush, chop, or chew the clove, which triggers an enzyme reaction between two components that are otherwise kept separate inside the cell structure. Studies on allicin have shown it has measurable antimicrobial properties in laboratory settings, and some clinical trials, smaller but real, have associated regular garlic consumption with a modestly reduced frequency and duration of common colds. I want to flag something important. Much of the strongest antimicrobial evidence comes from lab and in vitro studies, not large human clinical trials, so think of this as a genuinely promising low-risk addition rather than a proven cure for anything. The practical detail that changes everything. Crush or chop your garlic, and then let it sit for 10 minutes before cooking it. That resting period allows the allicin-forming reaction to complete before heat can destroy the enzyme responsible for it. Throw crushed garlic straight into a hot pan, and you lose most of the benefit before it even has a chance to form. So what should you do? 1 to 2 cloves a day, crushed, rested for 10 minutes, added toward the end of cooking rather than the beginning. We're a third of the way through, and I want to pause here because numbers 3 and 4 coming up are the ones I see even health-conscious people get completely wrong, including one that most people believe is automatically good for them when the truth is more complicated. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit subscribe now, because next week I'm covering the 5 everyday drinks quietly raising blood pressure after 60, and one of them is sitting in almost every kitchen cabinet in America. Number 5 is citrus, but I want to correct something first. Vitamin C does not prevent colds, despite 50 years of that belief lodged in the public imagination. What large clinical trials have actually shown is more modest and, frankly, more interesting. Regular vitamin C intake is associated with a slightly shorter duration and slightly reduced severity of colds once you already have one, particularly in people under physical stress. Vitamin C is also a critical cofactor, a helper molecule for the production and function of white blood cells, particularly neutrophils and lymphocytes, and it's a powerful antioxidant that protects those same immune cells from a kind of self-inflicted damage called oxidative stress, which happens naturally whenever the immune system is actively fighting something. 1 medium orange gives you around 70 milligrams of vitamin C. Half a red bell pepper gives you close to 95 milligrams, which often surprises people more than the orange does. Here's the catch. Vitamin C is heat-sensitive and water-soluble, meaning it degrades with cooking and leaches out into cooking water. So what should you do? Eat at least 1 vitamin C-rich food raw each day. Citrus, bell pepper, or kiwi are excellent choices, rather than relying only on a cooked version. Number 4 is mushrooms, specifically varieties like shiitake and maitake. And here's the "why is this even here" moment. Mushrooms are the only significant plant-based food source of vitamin D that your body can actually use, because they produce it themselves when exposed to UV light the same way your skin does. Mushrooms also contain a class of compounds called beta-glucans, complex sugars found in their cell walls, which laboratory and some clinical research have associated with modulating, meaning fine-tuning, not simply boosting, the activity of macrophages and natural killer cells, 2 frontline defenders in your innate immune system. I want to be careful with the word boosting here, because it's overused and often misleading in this space. An immune system that's simply boosted without direction isn't automatically a good thing. Autoimmune conditions are, in a sense, an immune system that's overactive in the wrong direction. What beta-glucans appear to do, based on the research we have, is help regulate and coordinate the response rather than blindly amplify it. That distinction matters, and any channel that tells you a mushroom supercharges your immunity is oversimplifying real biology into a slogan. So what should you do? 2 to 3 servings a week of shiitake or maitake, lightly cooked, sautéed, or added to soup, since cooking actually improves the bioavailability of several of their compounds, unlike the vitamin C we just discussed. Number 3, and this is the one I mentioned would surprise you, bone broth, but only the real, slow-simmered kind, not the boxed broth on a grocery shelf that's often closer to salted water with flavoring. Long, slow simmering of bones and connective tissue, 12 to 24 hours, releases collagen, gelatin, and amino acids like glycine and proline. Here's the mechanism that earns its place on this list. Your gut lining is a physical barrier that keeps bacteria and undigested particles where they belong, and a compromised gut lining, sometimes called increased intestinal permeability, has been associated in research with chronic, low-grade inflammation that quietly taxes the immune system over years, not days. Glycine and glutamine, both present in properly made bone broth, are amino acids that gut cells preferentially use for repair and energy. I need to be honest about the evidence here. Much of the strongest research on gut permeability and these specific amino acids comes from smaller clinical and mechanistic studies rather than massive randomized trials, so I'd call this a genuinely promising low-risk practice rather than a settled proven fact, the kind of claim I can defend, not inflate. So what should you do? A cup of real bone broth 2 to 3 times a week, ideally homemade, or from a source that lists actual simmer time, not a bouillon cube dissolved in hot water. We're almost there. Before I give you the top 2, let me tell you about a patient. I'll call her Margaret. 73, managing well-controlled type 2 diabetes, and a history of getting 2, sometimes 3 respiratory infections every winter that would knock her flat for weeks. She wasn't doing anything wrong, exactly. She ate reasonably well, but her diet had almost no variety, the same 4 meals rotating, week after week, comfortable and safe. We didn't overhaul anything. We added oily fish twice a week, a small daily serving of fermented vegetables, garlic crushed and rested before cooking, 1 raw vitamin C source daily, nothing removed. The following winter, she had 1 mild cold that lasted 4 days instead of the usual 2 weeks of misery. I can't tell you that food alone did that. She'd also finally gotten her flu shot that year, which I'd encouraged for 2 seasons running, and that almost certainly did real work too. But she told me something in her follow-up visit that stuck with me. It felt like something she was adding to her life, not another thing being taken away from her. That's the whole philosophy behind this list. Supply, not restriction. Number 2 is zinc-rich foods, oysters primarily, but also pumpkin seeds, and lean beef and poultry for a reliable dietary source. I want you to remember this mineral specifically, because zinc deficiency is startlingly common in adults over 60. Some studies estimate up to 1/3 of older adults have suboptimal zinc status, often due to reduced absorption and lower intake, not through any fault of their own. Zinc is required for T-cell development and function. Remember the thymus from earlier in this video, and the T-cells it trains? Zinc is one of the essential raw materials for that entire process. Even a mild zinc deficiency, well short of anything that would show up as an obvious symptom, has been associated in research with measurably impaired immune response. 6 medium oysters provide over 30 milligrams of zinc, more than most adults need in a single day. An ounce of pumpkin seeds gives you around 2 milligrams. Here's an important caveat, because more is not automatically better with this particular mineral. Chronically excessive zinc supplementation, well above the recommended daily allowance, has actually been associated with impaired immune function and can interfere with copper absorption. So what should you do? Favor zinc from food rather than high-dose supplements, unless a blood test has specifically identified a deficiency and your physician has recommended a targeted dose. And now, the one I promised you at the very beginning, the one I said comes with a catch, almost no other video mentions. Number 1 is bell peppers and other colorful vegetables, but really, this is a story about a plant compound called quercetin, and it's found across a much wider range of foods than most people realize. Peppers, red onions, apples, and yes, that fermented cabbage from earlier in the list. Quercetin is a flavonoid, a naturally occurring plant pigment, and it functions as both an antioxidant and, in some laboratory research, as something with mild antiviral properties. Here's the mechanism, in plain terms. Quercetin appears to help stabilize a certain type of immune cell called mast cells, which release histamine and other inflammatory chemicals when your body senses a threat. When mast cells are poorly regulated, which becomes more common with age, you get a kind of low-level, chronic inflammatory static running in the background, quietly consuming immune resources that would otherwise go toward fighting something real. I want to be exact about the evidence. Interest in quercetin surged during recent years partly due to some early, smaller studies exploring its interaction with viral replication in lab settings. And I want to be clear that this is preliminary, cell-based research, not a proven human treatment for any specific illness. No legitimate researcher is claiming that, and neither am I. But here's the catch, the one I promised. Quercetin is fat-soluble, meaning your body absorbs it far more effectively when it's eaten alongside a source of fat. A red bell pepper eaten alone gives your body access to only a fraction of its available quercetin. The same pepper, sliced and eaten with a drizzle of olive oil, or alongside some nuts, or sautéed in a little avocado oil, dramatically improves absorption. This is the detail that took me years of reading nutritional biochemistry literature to fully appreciate, and it's the reason this sits at the top of tonight's list, not because the compound itself is more powerful than everything else we've discussed, but because so many people are eating it in a form their body can barely use. So how do you actually put this together tonight, in one simple move? Here's what I call the evening bowl. 3 of tonight's items combined into a single small habit rather than 8 separate things to remember. Take a small handful of sliced red bell pepper and red onion. Add a 1/4 cup of naturally fermented kimchi or sauerkraut. Drizzle it with olive oil. This covers your quercetin absorption and gives you a dose of fermented food in one sitting. Eat it as a side with dinner, 3 or 4 nights a week. That's it. That's the whole habit. It's not a supplement stack. It's not a regimen. It's a bowl. This isn't fear. It's food chemistry. I want you to carry that phrase with you because I've said it once already tonight and I'm going to say it again before we're done because it's the entire philosophy behind everything on this list. Your immune system after 60 isn't failing you. It's asking for better supply lines. That's a completely different, far more empowering way to think about aging. Now, a few honest caveats. Because a responsible video earns your trust by telling you where the edges are, not by pretending there aren't any. If you're on blood thinners like warfarin, be aware that some of these foods, particularly leafy greens and certain fermented foods, contain vitamin K, which can interact with how your medication works. This doesn't mean avoid them. It means keep your intake consistent and mention any dietary changes to whoever manages your anticoagulation therapy. If you have chronic kidney disease, the sodium content in fermented vegetables and the potassium in some of these foods need to be discussed with your nephrologist or renal dietitian before you increase them. General guidance like tonight's video is not a substitute for guidance tailored to your specific labs. If you're immunocompromised due to chemotherapy, an organ transplant, or another condition, please talk to your care team before adding fermented or raw foods, since some centers recommend specific food safety precautions during those periods. And none of tonight's list is a substitute for your recommended vaccines. The flu shot, the pneumonia vaccine if your doctor has recommended it, the shingles vaccine. These remain some of the most protective, well-studied tools we have for immune health after 60, and nothing in this video should ever be understood as a reason to skip them. Let me be completely honest with you about why I make videos like this. This information isn't secret. Every study I've referenced tonight is published, peer-reviewed, publicly available. The NIH publishes it. The National Institute on Aging publishes it. Korean longevity research is published in international journals. It's free. And yet it almost never makes it to the dinner table of the people who need it most. It fails the retired teacher living alone who microwaves the same meal because cooking for one feels pointless. It fails the father who's certain he's doing everything right because he takes a multivitamin and never looks any closer than that. It fails the exhausted caregiver who hasn't had time to think about her own plate in months because she's managing someone else's. That gap between what's published and what actually reaches a real kitchen at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday is the entire reason this channel exists. Before I let you go, let's bring it all together. Oily fish, 2 to 3 times a week for vitamin D and omega-3s. Fermented cabbage, a small daily serving for gut diversity. Mindful of sodium if your blood pressure runs high. Garlic, crushed and rested 10 minutes before cooking for a listen. Citrus and bell peppers, eaten raw at least once daily for vitamin C. Mushrooms, 2 to 3 servings weekly, lightly cooked for beta-glucans and plant-based vitamin D. Real bone broth, 2 to 3 times a week for gut lining support. Zinc-rich foods like oysters, pumpkin seeds, and lean meat, prioritized from food over supplements, and quercetin-rich vegetables, peppers, onions, apples, always eaten with a little fat, because that one detail is the difference between a compound that helps you and a compound that passes through unused. If you're feeling overwhelmed by 8 items, start with just 2 tonight. The evening bowl I described a moment ago, and 1 raw vitamin C source with dinner. That's a realistic beginning. Build from there. I want to say clearly, because I take this seriously, everything in this video is educational information based on published research. It is not personalized medical advice, and it's not a replacement for a conversation with your own physician or a registered dietitian, especially if you're managing an existing condition. If you're on dialysis, if you're on blood thinners, or if you're immunocompromised. Your situation has details a video can never know. Bring this list to your next appointment and ask which parts genuinely apply to you. You cannot see your immune system working. You cannot feel a T cell being trained, or a mast cell being calmed, or a gut lining quietly repairing itself while you sleep. But it is happening every single day, built entirely from the raw materials you hand it 3 times a day. This isn't fear, it's food chemistry. And once you understand the chemistry, the fear disappears because you finally know exactly what to do about it. Tell me in the comments which of these 8 surprised you most. I read every single one. And tell me which 2 or 3 you're starting with tonight. Next week, we're talking about the 5 everyday drinks, quietly raising your blood pressure after 60. And I promise you, one of them is sitting in your kitchen right now. And you've probably never once thought to question it. Until then, take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.